Namaste, and welcome to Yoga Today. The talk for today is on the path of realization. And a lot of this information comes from a beautiful book called Realizing God by Swami Prabhavananda. And yogis would say, we are not this small person who struggles with life, who has to face daily challenges. This is not who we truly are. We're a soul. We're pure, eternal, painless, and in bliss. That's our true nature. How can we open ourselves to that true self, the person that we really are, not this person who struggles to control their emotions, to pay the rent, to, take care of the many, many things that life throws at us. We're not frail, we're not weak. We are pure, eternal, painless, and in bliss. And in Vedanta, they say that this sense of being eternal, the sense of immortality, the existence, the continuity of existence, it's not found in time. Many yogis believe in reincarnation, partly because they have experienced or remembered it or, have a deep experience of it, an understanding of it. If you don't, it's not a problem, not at all. But the idea that immortality it comes from coming back again and again isn't true. That's not what makes us immortal. Coming again to try again to realize our true being. No. Immortality comes when the self, the individual self, realizes its true nature. That we are one with God. It's an amazing thing to even consider. Instead of, as you struggle with the problems of the day, where to park your car, what store to go to, how much money you've got left for the rest of the month, whatever it is. Problems with families and friends and work and life. But yogis would say that every soul will eventually, at some point, experience this union. And that really reincarnation is just another opportunity to have that experience. So, what is this immortality? And so Swami Prabhavananda says, immortality runs contrary to human desire. What do we want as human beings? And he says we want to cling fondly to our individuality and our personality. And the word personality comes from the Latin persona, to sound through. So the idea is that our personality is a part of our being that your soul gets to sound through. That beautiful music sounds through a wind instrument. That this sound comes through you. In the same way, yogis would say your soul comes through your personality, expressing out into the world. And he said, and I love this from Swami Prabhavananda. These are the things that free the mind. If you spend even a little amount of time considering this possibility, you'll begin to realize how little the mind is. He says our individuality is the illusory product of a radical misunderstanding. I mean, where do you start? Where do you finish? And yet, if you listen to the words, they speak directly to your soul. To recognize that our individuality is the illusory product of a radical misunderstanding. And what is that misunderstanding? It's the false identification of the self with the non-self, the true self with the fake. And we can't tell it apart. We think this is who I am. This ego, this personality, this individual walking through life, me, 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 me. No. He says that if we honestly observe and reflect and pay attention, we realize that everything about this personal individual self is in a state of incessant change. Your body isn't the body you had yesterday, nor will it be the body you have tomorrow. And we know that because we were little children. We were babies who couldn't do much, who became grown-ups who could do all kinds of things. And then depending on your stage in life, you become an older person who finds there's less you can do. Incessant change. And we identify ourselves with that changing being. That's what we think, that's who we think we are. And it's the same with the mind. It's not just the physical body. Your mind is not the mind you had before. You learn all kinds of things that change how your minds work. Gets more, you push the boundaries back and then they come back. I mean, it's in flux in the same way your body is, ever changing. But he says beyond that change lies Turiya, the fourth state of consciousness. And yogis would say the three states of consciousness really that people live in mostly is we're awake. So that's the consciousness of the world around you. You're awake, you're aware, that's what's happening. So waking, dreaming. So, when you're asleep and you dream, that dream very often seems as real as your life outside of dreaming. And the last one is dreamless sleep. So those are our three main ways of experiencing life and ourselves. But he says, no, there's something beyond that ever-changing world. And that's Turiya, pure unitary consciousness. And when you have that experience, the awareness of all multiplicity, all thinking that things are separate and different, goes. He uses the word obliterated, gone. You're no longer this little individual. You are this, you could still be an individual soul, but you're part of the great soul. It says where there is ineffable peace, peace that's so sublime it cannot be expressed. And there's supreme goodness. This is your heritage. This is mine. That's the person you really are. That's what should be or could be sounding through your being at any moment. And so, how are we going to get from here to there? And this is from the Katha, one of the wonderful Hindu scriptures. And he says, in the Katha, it says, none beholds him with the eyes. By him, they mean God. So none beholds God with the eyes, for he is without visible form. Yet in the heart is God revealed. So it's not with these eyes, they're very limited. It's not these eyes with which we see. So in the heart is God revealed through self-control and meditation. It's one of the hallmarks of great souls is they say things that seem unattainable, and then they tell you how to get there. So how can you experience God in your heart? And he says, by self-control and meditation, when all the senses are stilled, the mind is at rest, the intellect wavers not. That, says the wise, say the wise, is the highest state. Letting go of all multiplicity. So, self-control and meditation. What is self-control? And this really comes from the Bhagavad Gita. And it says, know that the true self, they give the example of of a chariot where the true self is sitting, the rider in the chariot. The body is the chariot. The intellect is the charioteer who's driving the bus so often instead of the rider saying where we're going. The mind is the reins, the senses, the horses, and the roads, the mazes of desire. So there we go. Here we come as a human being, the true self lying inside this physical body with the intellect, the mind. The intellect is running the show. The mind is holding everything together. It's directed really by the senses and vice versa, in and out. The senses are the horses, and this whole being is off down the road of desire, running, waving through the maze of desire. That's our life so often. And so we would continue if you have no discrimination. That's where self-control comes from this discrimination. Without discrimination, that we're unable to recognize and understand the difference between what we see around us. We don't know what's good and bad, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. But we can't discriminate. We're unable to recognize the difference. The mind is uncontrolled. And the horses, the senses, unmanageable. They just pull us round from one thing to another to another. Because, there's something in one of I think it's the movie Hook about Peter Pan and Captain Hook. And he says about kids, it's just what they want all the time. Give me cookies, give me, toys, give me cookies. We just want, and you'd like to think we grow out of that, but we go from toys and cookies and, games and playing to wanting cars and boats and houses and holidays and good jobs. We just started a desire machine as the horses of our senses careen down the road, dragging us with them. But what happens if we develop discrimination? Then the mind is controlled because you stop for a moment, and we're going to talk about how can we do that? When the mind is controlled, the horses are gently, lightly, these horses are able to obey the reins of the mind. No pressure, not something terrible. You're not forcing yourself and making yourself be somebody you're not. as you discriminate, you can the charioteer holds the reins lightly, and the horses obey that light command of the reins gently. And then can the rider reach the end of their journey. The true self begins to run the show. We live attuned with that true self within. So how are we going to go about that? So they talk about, as I say, in the Katha, they talk about self-control and also about meditation. And really that's what yoga is about. Controlling the senses, the mind, the whole being, and meditating to find our way back to that true self. And so there are four main paths in yoga. This is what Swami Prabhavananda said. There are four main paths. Raja Yoga, which is about self-control by aligning your will with the divine will. Your will with your soul and the Lord of your heart, not with the horses and the reins and the desires. So, self-control and meditation, Raja Yoga. Jnana Yoga is this discrimination that helps us to have self-control, knowledge, hearing the truth of Brahman and meditating on it. Meditating on that which is changeless. Saying no to everything around us, including our own personality and individuality. Your beautiful practice of not this, where you can sit and as anything arises in your mind or your body, not this. And that's the beautiful Jnani practice. The next is Bhakta, love and devotion for God. Meditating on the Lord of your heart. One of the greatest privileges of having a human body is that you get to choose to do that. Love and devotion to God. And the fourth is Karma Yoga, the path of selfless service, selfless work, service to humanity. And then I love what he says then. It says, service to humanity in a spirit of worship. Not service to humanity because you think that you ought to, or that that's what a good person would do. You do it in a spirit of worship. And I hope that you can sense what a completely different experience of any action is if it's done by the ego, the senses, the mind, versus if it's done in a spirit of worship. You know, yogis would say that in terms of desires, it's our desire, when we get angry about something, it's our desires, this crazy maze of desire that makes us angry. We didn't get what we wanted. So what is it we do truly want? And so we go back to the Katha, and in maybe the most famous lines in the Katha from chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. One thing is the good, and quite different indeed the pleasant. Yogis spend so long learning this difference and what a life-changing thing it can be. So one thing is the good and quite different indeed the pleasant, having been of different requisitions. So the good and the pleasant come to us from different places. They both bind the soul to this being, but good befalls him who follows the good, but loses he the goal who chooses the pleasant. Let's just take a moment and close your eyes and just, contemplate this just for a few minutes. One thing is the good, and quite different indeed is the pleasant. Good befalls him who follows the good, but loses he the goal who chooses the pleasant. So there's so many. When we look at these four main paths, Raja Yoga is aligning your will, the will of this individual, to the will of God, the will of Spirit. When we choose the pleasant, we are choosing so often the individual will, the will that thinks that, oh, this is a good, I'll go eat this or watch that or do this with my time. It's enjoyable. And it's not to say that life is not enjoyable. For those who seek to do God's will, life becomes the most enjoyable. But when we do something that is truly good, we get tempted. Maybe you've got a plan to do something and somebody phones up and says, oh, will you come and do this with me? And that says, oh, that sounds like a better plan. And I can remember my mum used to say when I was a little kid, stick with your plan, do what you say you were going to do. And she wouldn't let us break agreements with people. And if possible, not even with yourself. You're a person. Why would you break your agreement with yourself? So, because your word needs to be your word, whether it's to another person or to your own being. So this idea of what is the good and what is the pleasant? And sometimes you can't make a judgment in advance. Because I always remember Little Crow saying, somebody asked him, what do you do when somebody is begging? And he said, I pray. What does he do? He's looking for the difference between the good and the pleasant. He's looking to attune to be of selfless service in worship to God. So he goes to God first. So he didn't make an arbitrary decision one day and say, right, I'm never giving money to people who beg because some of them are, just making money. Or, well, I'm always going to give food to somebody who begs. But what he said was, how do I, this little self, know what that person needs? So best to go to God first and pray and say, what's your will here, Lord? What a life. What a life you could have where everything comes out of that response, whatever way you're doing it, whether you're a Raja or a Jnani, a Bhakta or a Karma Yogi, you have that opportunity to discriminate between the good and the pleasant. And so going on to this is verse 2. It says, both the good and the pleasant approach man. So every day things come your way. Some are good and some are pleasant. And we don't always know the difference. Something that's good one day may be just pleasant the next day. Because these are, as they said, of different requisitions coming from different places. You can't always tell. And so in the Kathopanishad, it says, the wise one discriminates the two, having examined them well. So they don't go, oh, yes, I'll do that. They don't make a snap judgment. The wise man prefers the good to the pleasant. Prefers doesn't mean it's easier, but he prefers, or the wise woman prefers, the good to the pleasant, while the fool chases the pleasant. Why? Why do we chase the pleasant? And I love this. There's always an answer. Chases the pleasant through avarice. And I looked it up because avarice isn't a word we use a lot, and it means extreme greed for wealth or material gain. So through avarice, this extreme greed, and we hate to think of ourselves, but maybe you've been working on this, and your extreme greed is only half extreme greed, but it's there, it's within us, and we want to put the weight on the other foot. So through avarice, this extreme greed for wealth and material gain, and attachment. Oh, my child, my house, my car, my temper, my clothes, my fear, my whatever it is, the attachment to it. Me, mine, it belongs to me. And this is the way to freedom, making that distinction between the good and the pleasant. So just take into mind something. We'll just do it for a couple of minutes as we end today. But pick one thing that you've struggled making a decision about. And as a yogi, take the time and examine it well and see if you can discriminate between the good attuned with your true self, your soul, the Lord of your heart, with truth, or the pleasant as decided by the ego, the mind, the senses. Try. May you have a wonderful time with this most profound of yogic principles. May we choose the good over the pleasant. Namaste.